Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, and thanks for tuning in, and welcome to the latest instalment of gunnercooke's 5-webinar series. The response to this webinar has been fantastic, and I'm sure you'll all get a lot out of it. I'm Suresh Bhatt, a pensions partner at gunnercooke, and I'll be giving you my 5 top tips on appointing a professional trustee in the context of defined benefit and hybrid pension schemes. The reason I wanted to speak about this topic is that there is an increasing trend towards appointing professional trustees, and I feel it's an area that has not been talked about enough in the past. I should also add that, as well as helping parties through these processes, I've also been a professional trustee for the best part of 15 years, including at gunnercooke with GC Trustees Limited. As a result, I've been involved in a number of external provider appointment processes, as well as trustee appointment processes myself, so I'd like to think I know a thing or two about this topic. So before pressing on, just a few short housekeeping points. The first point is that my contact details are on the slide being displayed, as you'll see. I'd encourage you to contact me for more information about this topic, including a copy of the slides after this webinar. I've got lots to say about it. Secondly, this webinar will be around 20 minutes long, and I understand the webinar itself will also be available on the gunnercooke website, Twitter, and LinkedIn feeds in case you want to access this webinar again at a later date or share it with others. Thirdly, you should have some kind of dashboard to send any questions you have. Please do feel free to send them as they arise, and I'll keep a log of them and return to any that haven't already been answered at the end of the webinar. Finally, as well as giving you my top tips, I'll also do some scene setting and given the variety of people who have registered onto this webinar, I think that's probably the best way to move forward. Right, so moving on to the first slide, something a little bit more interesting, maybe. Now, I'm quite a big football fan, so apologies to your non-football fans out there. And the best analogy that came to mind when thinking about this talk related to Brian Clough. He was manager of Nottingham Forest for 18 years, won 4 League Cups, the Old First Division Championship, and 2 European Cups. However, immediately before he took this job, he was manager of Leeds United for only 44 days. Now, he was the same talented manager for both jobs, but clearly excelled at one club and not the other. I'd say, similarly, appointing the best professional trustee for your scheme is not straightforward. The standards of professional trustees can vary dramatically, and the role that a trustee will take is a very important one. To emphasise this point, it's worth remembering that you're likely to be choosing someone who you don't really know, who you will trust with millions of pounds of pension scheme assets, who has to ensure that the correct members get paid the correct benefits at the correct time, who will help decide the level of company contributions to your scheme, and who you may need to work with if you want to acquire, sell, or restructure companies within your group, or want to pay dividends out to shareholders. As previously mentioned, professional trustees are becoming more prevalent as well. Interestingly, a pensions regulator survey last year suggested that schemes with between 12 and 1,000 members were most likely to appoint a professional trustee, and as many as 50% of defined benefit schemes have a professional trustee already. Now, as anticipated, there is a variety of people listening in today, so as I said, I thought I'd take a step back and consider why there has been a focus on trustees, and particularly professional trustees, in the pensions industry recently. You may also be aware of a number of new trustees entering the marketplace. So some of the reasons, of course, include the higher profile that pensions has been receiving for a number of years now. I'm sure some of you will recall the mismanagement of pension schemes and the Robert Maxwell scandal as one of the earliest big pension stories. Then, from around the turn of the century, funding became a big issue as surpluses turned into ever-increasing deficits. More recently, the financial difficulties of sponsoring employers of schemes such as Tata Steel, BHS and Carillion have also hogged the headlines. In addition to this point, the sheer scale of the DB sector means that managing these pension schemes is not just a big deal for individual schemes, but also for the economy. Just move on to the next slide. As you'll see from the slide, the size of the sector is reasonably large. I guess the figures that most catch the eye is the £1.5 trillion of assets held by defined benefit schemes, which equates to around 3/4 of the annual GDP of the UK. These figures, by the way, were taken from the DWP's consultation papers recently. So despite this, a number of trustees have little or no pensions experience when appointed by either employers or members, and they essentially take on this role in a voluntary capacity in addition to their actual day job. This isn't a criticism, but merely a reflection of the reality of how things work in practice. It's therefore no surprise that the pensions regulator has also focused more on raising trusteeship standards with its 21st century trusteeship and governance campaign, as well as defining the meaning of professional trustees. This means that professional trustees can now be held to account by lay trustees and, more significantly, the pensions regulator through enforcing higher fines for failing to meet higher standards. We are also expecting the Professional Trustee Standards Working Group to report back in the next few weeks on what they see as an appropriate framework within which professional trustees should be judged. All this serves as useful background to my first tip, which is to understand why you want a professional trustee. It sounds obvious, but if you are clear on this from the start, you'll find it much easier to find the best candidate to meet your needs. For example, do you want someone to work alongside your existing trustees, act as chair of the trustee board, or perhaps even replace the current trustees with a sole professional trustee? The answer to this question is pretty fundamental to how you go about this process and what skills you'll be looking for. Other reasons you might want to consider a trustee, professional trustee, is to manage conflicts of interest. Now, whilst there are a number of ways to manage conflicts within the trustee board, there are instances where the conflict is so great that appointing a professional trustee is the best option forward. Succession planning is also one of the factors that play into this. For example, a lot of schemes are now experiencing difficulties in finding people to take on the role of trustee from within the company or member population. Governance is also a clear advantage of having a professional trustee. The time constraints on trustee boards can mean that they can't be as responsive as they need to be to progress matters with advisors, respond to employers, or events. And the appointment of a professional trustee can help with this, as well as assist with ensuring proper processes are in place and stuck to. And finally, there are also one of the key areas are appointing a professional trustee for major projects, for example, buy-ins or buyouts. Sometimes it can help to have an expert on the trustee board rather than simply relying on advisors. This can lead to quicker progress being made and more focused advice being requested. And in the case of buyouts, it can reassure insurers that there will be a good level of governance and responsiveness, which can help improve pricing. Ultimately, you're also likely to give the new trustee the level of engagement they will need from you in order to carry out their role to the best of their ability if you've thought long and hard about why you need a professional trustee. To properly understand this will take time, and the amount of time you need will differ based on the circumstances. But keep in the back of your mind how long you would personally spend to make sure you get the best advisor for, say, your personal finances, or the best tradesman for your home improvements. This will hopefully contextualise the importance of the decision you are making. Remember, you're effectively handing over one of the keys to the scheme, which houses millions of pounds of pension scheme assets, built up by much hard work over the years. Now, you could be forgiven for thinking that the next step should be simply to draw up a short list of candidates for you to consider. But the next tip I will share is to simply check your scheme's trustee and rules. Failure to do so can just complicate matters unnecessarily. I've picked three areas to focus on. One being the power of appointment and removal trustees. Now, usually this is a company power, but it can also be a trustee power. So clearly worth checking who has the power to appoint trustees to make sure you've got the correct decision makers involved in the process. The power to pay trustees is another point that's worth considering. Clearly, professional trustees will require payment for their services, but not all schemes have explicit provision allowing payment from the scheme's assets. Now, there may be payments made by the employer to the professional trustee, but there can be a perception of conflicts of interest where this happens. So if an amendment to the rules is required to enable professional trustees to be paid from the scheme assets, it's always best to ensure this change is made before the professional trustee is appointed, as this will help to avoid any perception of conflicts to a deed which the new professional trustee will be signing up to. Decision making is also a point I've put on the slide. When planning to appoint a professional trustee, it's always helpful to have an understanding of how many trustees are required to make a valid decision. This will change and differ from scheme to scheme. In a worst case scenario, it's in no one's interest to delay an appointment process if an imminent trustee retirement means that there will be no longer sufficient trustees on the board to make a valid decision in accordance with the scheme rules. As my third tip, I've put a robust selection process. So, having sorted out any issues with the governing documentation, you'll want to understand how to select your professional trustee. The traditional way this is done is to get some recommendations from your advisors, ask the selected candidates to put a proposal together, and shortlist the ones you would like to present for, say, 40 minutes to assess who would be the best. I have a number of tips in this area, so please contact me afterwards for more, but I've narrowed it down to three main points that should enhance the selection process and make it more robust. First point I've put is request for a tender document. So this should be no more than 1 to 2 sides of A4, and it's designed to ensure all parties who you're requesting to tender receive the same information initially and have appropriate expectations of the process. In practice, you should also attach some key documents like the latest valuation, accounts, and statement of investment principles. This really helps to get the best out of your candidates as they try to understand how they can help you. Who should be involved is a key point that should be considered as well. It's always best to involve people in the process who will be working with the professional trustee, whether it be some of the existing trustees or the secretary to the trustee. You can go through a very robust process and choose who you think is the best trustee, but it's in everyone's interest to have a trustee team that will work together. And so involving the people who will be working with the trustee on a regular basis can help this. I've also put checklist criteria. Again, from scheme to scheme, this will differ depending on your needs, But if you've established a checklist of criteria to assess all the candidates against, which contains your key requirements, you can check that the candidates who you see have actually addressed them. This should help very much in the next tip as well, which I'll move on to, which is selecting the best candidate. So assuming the process has gone smoothly so far, you'll hopefully find yourself in the position of having to choose between 2 or 3 high-quality candidates for the role of professional trustee. This is where a robust appointment process comes into its own, because it should make selecting the right candidate much easier. The criteria list in particular should capture the main reasons for your choice and also help you to give constructive feedback to the unsuccessful candidates. If at all possible, make the decision relatively soon after the presentations. To wait a long time before making your choice can look unprofessional and can be perceived negatively in terms of how confident you are that you've made the right decision. Appropriate feedback to unsuccessful candidates is also key, because remember, things don't always work out with whoever you've selected, and if you need to look again in the future and reconnect with one of the disappointed candidates, it's always good to have maintained a good relationship with them. Now, last but not least, it's an area which I'm particularly passionate about, and this is about professional trustee accountability. I think this is an area which has been somewhat overlooked in the past, mainly because I think the pensions industry has been a little bit behind the curve. To give you an example, the pensions regulator survey last year suggested that professional trustees tended to be appointed for over 10 years. Now, on the face of it, this seems great because it should mean that the professional trustees are doing a good job. Alternatively, it may well be that inertia is ruling in some cases because the value of the professional trustee is not being properly scrutinised by the employer or the lay trustees. In reality, it's probably more likely to be a mixed picture. Of course, accountability as a concept is important, particularly where pension scheme assets are being spent. And it's not a new concept either. The pensions regulator has been highlighting the importance of reviewing pension scheme advisors since it published its guidance on relations with advisors in 2008. In this guidance, the regulator recommends monitoring service levels of actuaries, auditors, legal advisors, and administrators. So why should professional trustees be any different? My tip here is to ensure that there are some criteria agreed at the start of the relationship with a professional trustee, outlining how you will measure the performance of the professional trustee on, say, an annual basis, perhaps with a more detailed look at the trustee's performance at perhaps 5-yearly intervals. How this is done in practice will be different for each scheme, and a set of circumstances will also change from scheme to scheme, where it's important that all parties understand the importance of accountability in their actions. Now, whilst I spent this webinar focused on the process of appointing a professional trustee, I'm not saying a professional trustee is required for every scheme. I advised on schemes where they have all the ingredients of a successful trustee board, such as high levels of scheme governance, engaged and diligent trustees, excellent conflict management, healthy relationships with employers, confidence to sensibly challenge advisors, and knowledge to manage one-off projects such as buy-ins, buyouts, or dealing with legal issues. However, there are a number of schemes where some or all of these elements don't exist, and in such cases, time needs to be invested in considering whether a professional trustee appointment is appropriate. And if it is, hopefully this webinar will have demystified some of the process for you. Now I'll just see if we've got any questions through. Not so far. So I can tell the sandwiches are calling you. So I'll just conclude with this quote at the end, which I thought was quite helpful in this context. And hopefully, if you take on these tips, it will help you to find the right person and the right trustee for your particular scheme. So that's the end. Hope you've enjoyed it. Have a great day, and please do contact me if you have any other questions on this subject. Thank you.